Okay, welcome everyone. This is our second class of looking at the eight worldly concerns, eight worldly dharmas. So let's begin with just a few prayers. John will put those on the screen. And here in the Gompa, if you want to go to, let's see what page it was. We'll do the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. That is
73.
73, yeah, great. And we'll do this 3 times tonight, just this verse. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And go to page 97. We'll do the short mandala offering. It starts on the bottom there and goes to the top of the next page. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Then refuge in bodhicitta, the first time in English, and then 2 times in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jamchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi daki chanyen gipe sonam gi dola benchir sangye drupar shok Sangye chodam soki choknam la Jamchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi daki chanyan gipe sonam ki dola venchu sangye drupar sho. Okay, good. You can set the prayer books aside. Let's do a short meditation in order to focus our minds a bit, as well as to set our motivation together. So again, just do the first few minutes meditation on the breath, using the breath to calm the mind. If you get distracted from the breath, then gently bring the mind back to the breath. So I'll ring the bell here to begin the meditation, and then I'll come in a few minutes to lead you in setting motivation. Now let's set our motivation together. And recall 2 weeks ago, I began by talking about how we all have this perfect human rebirth, this amazing opportunity. And as we know, we can use this human existence to achieve unbelievable results, to achieve good rebirths in the future through practicing a path of morality, attending to the law of cause and effect. We can attain our own liberation by practicing the 3 higher trainings, not just morality, but also concentration and wisdom. But moreover, we can attain our greatest potential, the state of Buddhahood, the state where we will then be able to work perfectly for the welfare of all beings. But wouldn't it be a shame if we never even practice the Dharma in this way in this life? In examining these 8 worldly concerns, we see how much we are caught up in the pleasures of this life. And being preoccupied with how do we attain what we want now in this existence, and not turning our sights towards even the next life, much less liberation or enlightenment. And as we'll discuss tonight, at least to try to hold this motivation of bodhicitta that we're working on right now is a way to transform our activities so that what we do doesn't become non-virtue, but rather becomes the cause for all beings to attain complete awakening. So we generate the mind of bodhicitta, particularly before we engage in these teachings, thinking that we are here with this one purpose, this main purpose, to help all sentient beings, and to accomplish that through becoming a Buddha ourselves. This is how we are able to transform our time together into the cause for the result of the enlightenment of ourselves and all beings. And it's also how we transform all of our actions, all of our activities into those causes. So again, think very deeply about that purpose, that single purpose of being here tonight, to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Okay, and welcome everyone. I think everyone was at the previous teaching. You were online, Sarah, I think, yes? Yeah. So good. I don't have to go through quite so much what I did 2 weeks ago, though I'll refresh everyone's memory. Again, we did start off talking about how we are kind of working with a human existence that has unbelievable potential to achieve amazing results. But we have to begin to let go of our attachment to this life. And of course, that attachment is embodied in what we call the 8 worldly concerns. And if we stay preoccupied with these and live our whole lives for these 8 worldly concerns, then we're never going to accomplish any real Dharma. Instead, we might be purporting to, practice Dharma, reciting lots of mantras and reading lots of texts and perhaps even doing a bit of meditation here and there. But if we continue to have our feet firmly grounded in this worldly existence and in the pleasures of this life, it's going to be impossible to make any real progress. Again, it's not to deny the benefit of planting these seeds through all the various things that we do, but at the same time, it's much more important that we actually practice Dharma. Like Lama Tisha says, give up this life in your mind. In this way, we can practice Dharma genuinely. So we looked at the first 2 pairs of the 8 worldly concerns last time. And again, I like to discuss them in this way because those first 2 pairs really do pertain a lot. Gotta get this thing adjusted. Maybe I can proceed. Seems like it's not there. That's probably good enough. So the first 2 pairs really do pertain to kind of what we are involved in our everyday lives to some degree. The things that we have, the pleasure that we gain from them, the comfort that we have in our existence. They seem to fit well together because a lot of the things that we have an attachment to in terms of material things are also those things that give us pleasure, that, and when we get parted from those and have the potential of losing those, this is what distresses us, is because we're going to be without those pleasurable objects in our lives. And so, again, if we look at it from the vantage point of practicing the Dharma, because we get caught up in these patterns of attachment, craving for what is pleasurable, craving to not be separated from what is unpleasant or unpleasurable, then essentially we are not doing Dharma work. Dharma work is all about transforming our minds. We're going to talk about this more tonight. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, it's quite possible to be completely happy no matter what the external conditions, no matter how much noise there is or how unfavorable the conditions are. Nothing becomes a distraction for the person whose mind is free from the thought of the 8 worldly dharmas. Her mind is unworried, happy, and stable all the time. So we see that this is the problem with these, and we're going to go into this in a little more detail after I finish discussing the other 2 pairs, is that they keep us from actually fully engaging in Dharma, because we actually are doing the opposite. We are practicing worldly Dharma, which is clinging to those things in this fictitious way and making them the primary things that we are after. And that only feeds our attachment, our desire, feeds our anger and frustration when we don't get what we want. So this is the problem with these, is that they take us so far afield of what we're actually trying to do. This is why we have to begin to address these if we haven't already, and certainly find a way to completely part from these 8 worldly dharmas if we can. So let's go on to the next pair. These are craving for a good reputation and craving to be free from a bad reputation. And praise and criticism, again, that we're going to talk about next, those are things that we usually receive directly, right? Someone says those things to you or writes those things to you. But when it comes to a good reputation or bad reputation, those are happening sometimes in the field of others saying things about us. I mean, we might not even hear those things except, through the grapevine. Suddenly we go, how did I get this bad reputation? Why are people thinking poorly of me? Because other people have been talking about you. Other people have been saying things about you, whether true or untrue. Lama Zopa Rinpoche feels this is a really difficult one for us to renounce. Now, again, we might have varying levels of attachment to that. I do find that as I work with the different the pairs of these 8 worldly dharmas, that some of them are real triggers for me. Some of them are not so big. If you hear other people talking about you, and you kind of realize that, you've gotten a bit of a bad reputation, perhaps from who knows where. For some people, it's like water off a duck's back. They really don't care that much what people say about them, because they feel strong enough in their own view of themselves and their integrity that they can, perhaps learn from that experience and not get totally bent out of shape by it. But most of us do have some desire to be admired by others, to have a good reputation. And it might be in different circles. Maybe we have a good reputation in our workplace or within our family, and meaning, kind of the extended family, perhaps, people who interact with us who have some opinion about us. But, one of the problems is we spend so much time acquiring a good reputation that we also then become very defensive if, something goes astray, if people do start talking about us in ways that are contrary to how we see ourselves. And we often even engage in our actions and behavior with the intention of gaining a good reputation. Now, this is a little similar to, again, why I like these 2 pairs together, is because praise and criticism and good reputation and bad reputation also are all about what others are thinking and saying about us, either directly to us in the society at large or in some larger circle. But, the reality is that when we are, preoccupied with so much of that we really are totally about feeding our own ego, feeding our own sense of self that is already a big lie, already a distortion. But we like to build ourselves up to hear all these wonderful things, to, have people think well of us. I know Venerable Robina, when she was doing a retreat once, she was talking about how many of us get into this pattern. We call it people pleasers. We like to please people, and there's nothing wrong with pleasing people. I don't want to make it sound like, this is a really important thing that we completely abandon, because it's good to be able to make people happy and to actually do and say things that they find pleasing to them and that help them and so on. We do want to have a good reputation and work with others in that way. But what's our motivation for pleasing people? Why do we do so much to try to keep everyone happy and, keep everyone thinking, good things and what have you. It's because we will benefit from that, because we think that if we hold on to that good reputation, that there's something that we will benefit from, that we will actually gain from that. So this is the problem, we get caught up in it. So we have a sort of ulterior motive for why we are being kind and generous and compassionate towards others. Because we want people to think, oh yeah, that Don, he's a really good guy, blah, 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 blah. We don't want to hear, oh, that Don, he's a real jerk, right? So we do all these things with the aim of having that kind of feedback, having that kind of feeling in the world around us, whatever, again, circle that we're talking about. I mean, it is interesting when you have somebody, well, this maybe starts to move us into praise and criticism, but if you have somebody who you hear about who's maybe saying things that are negative about you, it becomes this huge thorn in your side. Everyone else might think you're that great guy, great girl, whatever, whatever adjective or noun you want to put in there, great person. But you latch onto that one person and you say, well, why are they saying bad things about me? Why can't they have the same opinion of me that everyone else has? It's because we want everyone to have this perfect view of us, to have this good reputation that we can rely upon in all of our interactions with others and so on. And Rinpoche talks about how attachment to a good reputation can even disturb us when we meditate or when we engage in other spiritual practice. Can definitely happen. You go to, for example, some of these retreats with Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and you want to kind of be on your best appearance to some degree. But why? Why do you want to be at every session? Make sure that you're sitting there with your nice upright meditation posture, doing all the practices and things that Rinpoche advises. If you really have a genuine desire to practice the Dharma, that's one thing. But if you're mostly thinking about, oh, I have to worry about how I'm being perceived in this audience of both these people, and who's watching me and who's going to think poorly of me if I'm not doing all these things. I hate to say it, but sometimes as a teacher, this comes into play because, as a teacher, you do have a reputation that you want to kind of maintain, but you have to be mindful of why you're maintaining that reputation. Do you want it so that you can have people thinking well of you, so you get all this sort of good feeling of having that, the attachment to that? Again, the attachment to avoiding the opposite? Or are you really genuinely interested in helping others? This is where when Venerable Urbina was talking about it, she says, people pleasing, again, can become a problem if we're doing it with that ulterior motive. We're constantly going after just people thinking well of us so that we have that, oh, I feel pretty good. Everyone really likes me. What was that, Sally Field, right? When she accepted the Oscar, the second Oscar award, she said, they really like me. You really, really like me. We like that kind of feeling. We have this good reputation. People like us. But why? I mean, again, if the motivation is pure, if you really want to have a good reputation so you can benefit others, so you can be close to them and help them in a much more direct way, a more positive way, then there's nothing wrong with that. We're going to get into motivation after we finish going through these, because our motivation is everything when it comes to these activities. As I said last time, the objects themselves of these 8 worldly dharmas are not the problem. The good reputation, bad reputation, these are not the problem. The problem is our attachment to the good reputation and our attachment to avoiding the bad reputation. Just like we saw with the material objects, as well as the pleasure, comfort, what have you, that we looked at in the other pairs. So as Rinpoche says, if on the other hand we don't crave the admiration of others, we're not attached to that, then we don't care when they speak badly of us. Whether they admire us or not, whether we have a good reputation or not, our mind remains undisturbed. Whatever the external conditions, he says, our mind remains equal, tranquil. We lead a life of equanimity. It is kind of interesting. We use this word equanimity in a variety of ways in Buddhism. This is about developing some equanimity to these experiences, to feel like the mind isn't, again, going to be like a yo-yo. I think I mentioned this last time. We get all excited when we have the positive thing, the good reputation, the material gain, the pleasure, what have you. And then when things go south, we get totally bent out of shape. We go crawl into our bed and turn off all the lights and just, don't want to see anybody and, kind of weep quietly to ourselves because we don't have what we desire. Well, this is not a way to live one's life. We're going up and down without that equanimity, without a balanced approach to whatever it is that is happening. Because these are going to happen. We're in samsara. You're going to have material gain and material loss. You're going to have pleasure and you're going to have, displeasure. You're going to have comfort and discomfort. You're going to have a good reputation and a bad reputation. And as we see in the last one, you're going to have praise and you're going to have criticism. But if you don't have attachment to those things, if you're not really worried about those things, then they come and they go and it doesn't matter. This is a bit like that Taoist farmer that I've used this example many times in my teachings in the past. The Taoist farmer who has a horse that runs away. That's the first thing. And the neighbor comes and says, "Oh, I'm so sorry for you. You must feel horrible. Your horse ran away." He says, "Who knows what's good or bad?" Then the horse comes back with another horse, a wild horse that it found. And so now he has two horses. And the neighbor goes, "Oh, how wonderful. You have two horses." And he says, "Who knows what's good or bad?" Anyway, there's a whole chain of things that happen from there. Some seemingly wonderful, some seemingly awful. But the Taoist farmer always says the same thing. He says, "Oh, who knows what's good or bad?" We never know. And of course, in the mind training teachings that we study, frequently in this tradition, we have the ability to work with either one of these. If pleasant things come in, we have a good reputation, we have material gain, we can offer that to others. We can think about others at that time, and we can use what we have to benefit others. If you have a good reputation, use it to be able to talk to people, to influence them, to have some, ability to share the Dharma with them. If you have a bad reputation, well, you can learn from that too. You can take that in and say, "Well, that's interesting. How did I create the karma for that? What are the things I need to pay attention to so that I avoid that in the future, if that is something that is useful for me to have in this world?" Comes to the same thing with praise and criticism. Let's move on to that pair, because I think, again, these do fit nicely together, these two pairs. When people praise us, of course, we get really inflated. Just like the mind of pride, our mind swells up, the sense of I swells up. We like to hear words of praise. We like to hear people say, "Oh, you're so good at this, and you're so good at that. You're such a wonderful this and that. Your voice is so beautiful." Blah, blah, blah. This is stuff that we like to hear, but we have to be very careful, Rinpoche says, when we're being praised, because the inflation of the mind that occurs will sort of take us away. Sort of like inflating an air balloon that then just floats away, right? We kind of lose touch with reality. We're no longer on the ground. And we don't really see ourselves in a really honest way, because we latch onto the wonderful things that are being said by others, that are the praise that they give us. And then we get into expecting that praise, right? We do all these things for others. Maybe we help them out. They need some help with errands, or they whatever it is that they are calling upon us for, and then we expect that they're going to say, "Oh, you're such a good friend, Don. I'm really glad that you're in my life. You're such a wonderful person. You share your time so freely." And then when we have that one time when somebody doesn't say thank you at all, they just kind of walk away, after we've done something for them, then we're like, "Whoa, what's going on here?" Our mind gets used to receiving that praise, become attached to that praise. We want everyone to say wonderful things about us. And again, what I was alluding to earlier, when we have somebody who says something negative about us, then that becomes our focal point. How can that person possibly think that about us? How can they have that negative view of us? The Rinpoche goes into some interesting things around praise, because he talks about, first of all, if we hear words of praise and criticism. If we hear words of criticism from someone else, that's one thing. But if we criticize ourselves, which we do all the time, right? Most of us are really hard on ourselves. Unfortunately, this is one thing we need to all work on, is being a little more compassionate towards ourselves. He uses the example, he says, if we get angry when somebody calls us a dumb animal, why don't we get angry when we say the same words to ourselves? I don't know if I've called myself a dumb animal, but I've certainly called myself some things, maybe worse than a dumb animal. But we don't get that upset when we're kind of putting ourselves down. The minute that someone else says that about us, we're like, "What are you talking about? That's not fair. That's not right. You shouldn't be calling me that. I'm not that." But we're really hard on ourselves in the same way. Another example that he uses is, what if you just take words of praise? For example, if someone, Alex praises me, and that's really nice to hear it from some person. But if you take a recording of somebody saying, "Oh, you're a wonderful person," and you just play it back to yourself again and again, it doesn't have the same effect, right? Oh, you're a wonderful person. Oh, you're a wonderful person. You don't get the same charge out of it. If the words themselves were the cause of your, good feeling, then you would hear them anytime and they would be the same thing. If you heard the words of criticism, whether you're giving them to yourself or receiving them from someone else, they would sound the same, but they don't. Why is that? Again, because we are attached. We are attached to receiving the praise from others. And we even get to, again, as I said earlier, expect the praise from others. We want everyone to say, oh, how wonderful you are. Oh, you're such an amazing, kind person. And again, anyone says anything opposite, then because they said it about us, we take it incredibly personally. Of course, the one thing they always emphasize, and Rinpoche goes into this to some degree, is that we can actually learn a lot from criticism. If there are 9 people who all praise you and one person who criticizes you, it is good to listen to that criticism and say, well, again, what is that person seeing in me or hearing me say, or whatever it is that I'm doing that is worthy of criticism that I can then pay attention to. Lama Zopa says the Kadampa Geshes who practiced thought training used criticism on the path to enlightenment. Their reasoning was, if we like praise, we should like criticism as well, because both are just words, sound waves hitting our ears, nothing more. But for the Kadampa Geshes, blame was very good. They liked to receive as much criticism as possible. The more they received, the more opportunity they had to practice thought training. And of course, also to even look at that and say, is there some validity to what I'm being criticized about? Is there some seed of truth in there? Remember, I think we've studied the 7-point mind training. I know I've studied with all of you previously, no doubt. I think you even had teachings from Geshe on that not too long ago, right? 7-point mind training. I'm not sure. Yeah. There's a wonderful little aphorism in there. One of the slogans, it says, of the 2 witnesses, trust the primary one. And that, again, is not to let you off the hook in terms of what others are saying about you, because there are 2 witnesses to everything that goes on. There's you as the witness, that's the primary one. But then there are others who witness what you are doing and saying and so on. Well, this advice in the mind training is to, of the 2 witnesses, pay attention to the primary one ourselves. I think we have to be careful with that advice, though, because we can really cheat ourselves and we can often have a higher view of ourselves than what we realistically should have. We do need to hear what others are saying and take it in as potentially something that will give us more tools to work with, a better view of ourselves, a more complete view of ourselves. If other people are criticizing you, there's something worth attending to in that. If you decide through your own investigation, though, that what they have criticized you on is not actually valid and that you do have qualities that they're blind to at that time, then you can rest in that and you can trust the primary witness, that you yourself have done the analysis and you know that that criticism isn't well-founded. But the criticism is still worth hearing and is worth investigating. We can use it in our mind training. And instead of getting angry, we can see that this is an amazing opportunity for us. Be thankful for those people who criticize you, give you the, difficult stuff to work with. Because without them, how are you going to develop your mind? So Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and this is, I haven't even mentioned this book. The main book I mentioned last time was The Door to Satisfaction. But there's this wonderful book that I'm sure many of you have. Alex has it here in the Gompa, How to Practice Dharma, Teachings on the 8 Worldly Dharmas. And I really do recommend it. I've got lots of little places here that I've marked, where some very wonderful passages from Rinpoche teaching on this. It's an important book because as we're exploring in this course, this is how we actually begin our practice of Dharma, how we make sure that what we are doing when we are meditating and studying and doing all the other Dharma activities, that they are real Dharma, because we're not doing them with, again, half of the motivation and worldly concerns and half of it in some other concerns. We want to do it fully with other concerns about things beyond this life. The next existence, liberation, enlightenment, and so on. So in that book, Rinpoche talks about, at the end of kind of going through these, he says, here's an experiment. Watch your mind when you meet any of the 4 desirable objects. When you meet material gain and comfort or pleasure, good reputation, praise. How does it feel at that time? When you look below the surface of the excitement and sense pleasure, you'll see that it's never peaceful or relaxed, but actually confused, agitated, disturbed. It's lifted up, but also uptight, as if gripped by an iron glove. This is one of the ways that we begin to undermine this, is we see that what we are experiencing when we are following that mind of attachment isn't really peaceful, isn't really what we're aiming for. This is what we've been buying into since beginningless time, is going after those pleasures, thinking that this is what we need, this is what will do the trick. We put all of our money on those, worldly concerns, and they don't do it at all. Instead, they agitate the mind further. Rinpoche says that is the nature of attachment. Attachment is actually a very unsettled mind. Right? I mean, if you can see it, I might point to like children as a good example of this, right? Because children haven't learned how to kind of keep their attachment from being revealed to others. Most adults have figured out how to conceal their attachment, right? They find clever ways and very shifty ways of kind of getting the things that they want with other people and what have you. But children will come right out and say, no, that's mine, and grab it from, a kid that takes it away from them or something. So we can see that this is, what attachment is like. It's this mind that is continually grasping and trying to get things. And we can feel it and pay attention to it in our own minds if we take the time to do that. But we can't continue to be this sort of, again, shifty and clever with how we conceal our attachment. We have to see it for what it is. Attachment does not lead you to a peaceful mind. It leads you to an extremely agitated one. Rinpoche says we're in pain, but it's different from the pain of sickness, or we can say the pain of those four other sides of the worldly dharmas, right? There we have pain because we lose things, or because it's uncomfortable, or because we've got a bad reputation, people are criticizing us. We have that pain that is manifesting because we are experiencing something unpleasant. But here, it's the pain of attachment. He says this is hard to see or control because strong attachment is mixed with our experience of the object, right? This is the thing, it's so hard. They say attachment is like oil and cloth, right? That the oil gets into the cloth and it's very hard to remove because it seems like it's part of the whole experience. Having the pleasant object in our life, the attachment is right there with it. This is the hardest thing about attachment, I find, is to be able to separate that out and to see that the pleasant thing can be there. As I've been emphasizing, and Rinpoche emphasizes, the object is not the problem. The pleasant experience is not the problem. The attachment is the problem. But the attachment sinks into this and seeps into it and becomes part of the whole experience. And we've convinced ourselves since beginningless time that this is the solution to our dilemma. We want happiness, so this is how we get it. We don't want to suffer, so we keep clinging to this and avoid everything that's over here and push that away when it's unpleasant. Well, it doesn't lead to that at all. He says, it obscures us from seeing the object's real nature and what is happening in our minds. Wrapped as we are in desire for the object, we're unable to see that all the worry, aggression, unhappiness, and fear we have in this life comes from that desire, which is excessively concerned with the happiness of this life. So we are, Venerable Robina's wonderful quote that she gives, saying, we're like junkies born into a world of junk. This is really what is going on. We come into this world with these incredible cravings and desire. Of course, underneath the surface, the very basic starting point is our quest for happiness and freedom from suffering. Again, the Buddha didn't say there's a problem there. The problem becomes very prominent very quickly, though, because we immediately ascribe happiness to these experiences of these pleasurable objects. And we get attached to that, and we crave that, and cling to that, and we don't want the opposite. And this is how we create this pattern. We have to begin to break this pattern. Now, this is the whole next section in the Door to Satisfaction. It's all about cutting off desire. Desire, attachment, these are used interchangeably. Sometimes we talk about grasping or craving. These are all part of that same continuum. You can see how the mind can be elevated to these greater degrees of attachment. But the evil thought of the 8 worldly dharmas and anything kind of correlated with this in terms of attachment and desire, this is the source of all of our problems. I mentioned last time that when the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, for the second noble truth, the truth of the cause of dukkha, the cause of our dissatisfaction, the Buddha said it's craving, it's attachment. That's the main cause. Of course, we know from our studies that underneath the surface of that is ignorance. We'll talk about that a little bit more later tonight. But this is the most kind of active way that we create patterns of suffering for ourselves, is by craving and grasping at the pleasurable objects and craving to be parted, separated from, not experience the unpleasant ones. As long as that is our mode of operating, as long as we keep following the mind of desire, we're going to keep experiencing suffering. So he goes into a more detailed way of kind of how we begin to kind of overcome this, to begin to see that this is a problem that we have to address. He starts off by talking about how one of the main ways that we can combat our desire is through seeing its faults. I mean, sometimes this is enough. I realize that for many of us, it takes more than that. We need to not just say, because we could be very convinced that there's a fault to doing it, but we might still engage in it. This even happens. I oftentimes use medical examples. Like if you get advice from a doctor says, you really shouldn't be eating these foods and you should be doing more of this. And we might still go, yeah, nice advice, but I think I'll just keep eating my food that I enjoy, So we might need more than just seeing the faults, but this is a good place to start. And for some of us, this may be the impetus that we need to begin to reduce this mind of attachment that craves obtaining those four things and avoiding the other four. So the first one is realize how desire only leads to dissatisfaction and blocks true peace and happiness. We touched on this a little bit just a few minutes ago, right? You don't actually get satisfied by that mind of desire. In fact, it keeps you agitated and in an unsettled state. You're just constantly like that junkie. We would call someone else a junkie when they have attachment at that level that we define that at. But we're all junkies in that continuum. We're all continually looking at, well, what do I need now? What is it that's going to bring me pleasure now? And if something comes in that brings us displeasure, well, then we find our way of avoiding that and getting away from that, not even doing anything to work with it. So not knowing that the nature of desire is suffering, we can't see that there's some better happiness that we should actually be striving to attain. I may have mentioned this 2 weeks ago, I don't recall, but this I think is one of the hardest things. It's because when we hear these teachings on giving up desire or attachment, we often think it means, why then I have to give up my happiness? No, it actually is to obtain real happiness. It's actually to obtain more lasting happiness. It's just that we haven't been exposed to that real happiness yet. We haven't tasted that maybe to the degree that we've tasted all these transitory pleasures. Right? We've been tasting those since beginningless time, and we know that they bring some form of pleasure. It's all generally sensual pleasure, other mental pleasure perhaps attached to it. But the idea is that we can attain a real state of peace and happiness. Rinpoche calls this the happiness of Dharma. When you are actually able to let go of all of that, then there is a peace that comes that we don't know yet. Of course, this is for the person who is striving for their own individual liberation. This is their main goal, right? We often define nirvana as peace. Well, what is that peace like? That peace is no longer having a mind that is driven to go chasing after all of these things, because that has been dismantled. We no longer have that attachment. We don't know that peace yet. We don't know the peace of nirvana, certainly, but we don't even know necessarily, again, some of you, I'm sure, have tasted some of this, but we don't necessarily know fully that peace that is being free from these afflictive states, not going kind of chasing after all of that. No, again, this is something that we need to continue to work on and to understand, that to be able to see attachment as what drives us to suffer, what is leading us to suffer, what is leading us to more agitation and dissatisfaction in our lives. Rinpoche says the nature of attachment is like that. It's not really peaceful. It's painful, and life is constantly suffering. What it really, really means to practice Dharma is to see it for that, to begin to move away from that mind of attachment, because we've seen it for what it is. It's not our best friend. It's not leading us down the path to obtaining more happiness. It's doing, again, the exact opposite. he quotes Lama Yeshe here. He says, Lama Yeshe said that everything comes to you once you're able to let go of this mind of desire. From your side, there's no thought of seeking, no attachment at all. But everything comes as a result of the power of Dharma. Everything comes. Again, we don't know this yet. At least I don't know this yet. I know it conceptually, but to move in that direction, to fully let go of our desire, to see the peace that we can have, to see how everything comes without that mind that is driving us in that way. This is what we have to become inspired to do by seeing that this is a fault of desire. A second fault of desire is that desire leads to other afflictions and the problems that ensue. Lama Tsongkhapa says, according to Rinpoche, desire brings so many other problems. Through following desire, the mind becomes rough and unpeaceful. Remember that anger is what happens when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So the more that we are attached to something, the more rough and disturbed the mind is when we don't get it, when we get the opposite, right? So we can actually see that this desire isn't just a problem in and of itself. It leads to so many other afflictive states. We end up living our lives, constantly being agitated and annoyed by everything that gets in the way of bringing us those worldly dharmas. As Rinpoche says, the stronger the clinging, the stronger the anger that arises. And again, we know this from experience. These are not new teachings in that regard, but have we really learned from it? Have we really learned that the stronger I'm attached to things, the greater pain there's going to be for myself, the greater anger will arise when I lose those things and have to face their opposites. Jealousy arises, so many other things. And then, of course, we engage in negative behavior on the basis of that. That negative karma then causes us to experience unbelievable suffering, even the suffering of the lower realms. So this is again to see that not only does it have this fault of kind of not leading to satisfaction, actually creating more dissatisfaction, but it also leads to further afflictions, also leads to us engaging in unhealthy actions on the basis of that. The final fault that he points out is recognizing how desire keeps us from progressing on the path of Dharma. If we're really sincere in our desire to practice Dharma, and all of us have some level of aspiration, or we wouldn't be here tonight, right? We wouldn't be listening to the teachings if we didn't have some aspiration to practice this path. And this path spoke to us years ago, most of us, when we first encountered these teachings, and we said, this is stuff that I can really get behind. I can really sink my teeth into this. I can really do something with this. Well, if we continue, again, to have our feet firmly grounded in worldly dharmas, we're never going to put the energy and do much to really practice Dharma in the ways that we aspired to, in the ways that we were really excited about when we first met the Dharma. And I know for me, when I first found the Dharma in 1993, this was like such a door opening for me. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. This whole path, there's so much richness to all of this, and I really want to practice this. But, in those 30 years since then, practically, have I really done the work of letting go of the worldly dharmas that keep me, again, as I was saying earlier, grounded in worldly concerns, grounded in the attachment to this life? I know this sounds pretty radical, and you might kind of, listen to this and go, well, yeah, I hear it and everything, but, I think we have to take these teachings somewhat seriously and recognize, though, that, again, this isn't a switch we can flip. I can't just go in my mind and say, okay, I'm giving up all my worldly dharmas from now on, and I'm going to be perfectly fine going forward for the rest of this life, all the way to enlightenment. We have to do this gradually. We have to begin to examine these things and see these faults. But if one of the big faults is that we aren't even able to progress on the path in the way that we'd like to, well, that can be distressing to ourselves. But then when we also think that there are others who aren't benefiting because we continue to give a sense of lip service to the Dharma, we keep, saying how wonderful it is and how much we want to practice it, but we still are totally caught up in the worldly dharmas. Well, then we're also shortchanging them, right? They're not getting the full benefit of our dedication to the Dharma. As much as we cultivate this mind of bodhicitta, if we don't actually make it a reality in our actions and in our, abandoning of these worldly dharmas, then it's not really, again, healthy Dharma practice. Rinpoche says the definition of non-Dharma is simply anything that is done for the happiness of this life alone. If we really want to engage in Dharma, then we have to engage in that which is exactly the opposite. It's anything that's done for happiness beyond this life. We have to do all of our actions with that motivation. Engage in everything that we do with a mind that is intent upon achieving these greater results. It isn't so caught up in, oh, this wonderful thing that I'm going to go chasing after. Was a meditation I led way back in the beginning of my Dharma career on death and kind of this idea. We use this analogy sometimes of going to an island of jewels, right? And that you, if you kind of leave that island without any jewels, well, then you haven't used this perfect human existence well. Well, this is a slightly different way of using these jewels. I had this idea of like this meditation would be a sort of an experiential meditation where you've sort of been wandering in the dark from cave to cave, from lifetime to lifetime, and you've never really found anything that is kind of light. And you come into one cave, and suddenly you're reaching on the ground, and you pick up what is a match and a candle, and you're able to light the match and light the candle, and suddenly you've got light in this one existence, this one cave that you are in, and you see that. Not only do you have the candle and the match, but you also have a little map there that shows you exactly where to find more candles, as well as how to get out of the whole web of caves entirely, so that you are no longer caught in this maze, right? Okay. But then you start looking with the light and you see that there are all these wonderful jewels in the cave. They're all there for the taking. And you can become totally enthralled with these jewels while your candle's burning down, while it's getting shorter and shorter, while your time to be able to get to another candle or to even get out of the whole, maze of caves, that's dwindling. Well, this is kind of what we're doing. We see this and we go, oh, wow, here's this amazing map. This is what real Dharma is to practice this map that leads me to out of this existence to at least a good existence beyond it, to liberation, to enlightenment. That's where I need to put my attention. But we instead, are using the light of this life, this precious existence, to just simply take in all these pleasing things that we see and enjoy and what have you. I don't know. I thought it was a powerful meditation because it felt very real to me. It felt like, again, and that was many years ago that I said that meditation. How much I meditated on it myself maybe is in question. But we do have to begin to see that this is what we're doing. We're not progressing on the path of Dharma to attaining these great results that we can through the Lam Rim, because we're totally enthralled with samsara. We're enchanted with samsara. Remember, another word for renunciation is disenchantment. Disenchantment isn't just, or renunciation isn't just at that level of the Lam Rim. It's throughout our path. We have to continually remind ourselves not to get caught up in and enthralled by the pleasures of existence. The pleasures of this life that we are totally attached to that keep us from even focusing on our next life, as well as the pleasures of the next life that are still within samsara. So we have to, again, see it for what it is and recognize that to actually practice Dharma means to be dedicated to something beyond the happiness of this life, not to the happiness of this life. Again, the happiness is still going to occur. That's the trick about it too, is the more we actually pay attention to following the map, to actually doing all of this work, we're guaranteed to have the happiness of this life. It's not going to be identical to what we've been experiencing, because we will have a deeper happiness, actually. We will have the happiness of Dharma, the happiness of letting go of our attachment to all of that stuff, the happiness of actually being about greater things beyond ourselves and focusing on the welfare of others and so on. But we have to, again, give it a try. We have to actually move away from those things that are keeping us from progressing. As Rinpoche says, this means that anyone who seeks only enlightenment, which is beyond samsara, and practices Dharma in order to achieve it, even though not seeking the happiness of this life, will find it naturally. And we will have that happiness. We just don't need to become preoccupied with it and attached to it. It will happen because it's a natural byproduct of dedicating ourselves to a path of virtue, dedicating ourselves to renunciation, bodhicitta, and so on. So this is kind of the way he moves into beginning to talk about combating the 8 worldly dharmas, is to see these 3 faults in particular. Again, that it only leads to dissatisfaction, that we will continue to even have more other afflictive emotions, and that it's going to keep us from really doing what we are intending to do. Because As I said earlier, every one of you, and you're to be congratulated on this, you do have a good heart and a good aspiration. You do have a good desire to practice the Dharma in a genuine way. It's just that we got to get our foot out of that, pot of the 8 worldly concerns and dedicate ourselves completely to moving forward. And it's extremely difficult. This is not, easy to give up. But giving up on this life, as we've been talking about, is really the beginning of our Dharma practice. So I mentioned earlier that I want to talk about the importance of motivation, and that's because if we are able to, through our own learning and meditation and practice, really get some inkling of bodhicitta, some taste of bodhicitta. Rinpoche emphasizes that bodhicitta is actually the way that we should be going about engaging in these worldly concerns. Again, not that we have the same mindset with them at all, the attachment won't be there. But if we actually do all of these things with the mind that cherishes others, with the mind that is intent upon achieving enlightenment for their sake, then we can actually change those actions. No doubt John Landau, when he taught last week, when he went through the verses, the twin verses in the Dhammapada, the very first twin verses, the first 2, are these wonderful ones that Rinpoche even quotes frequently. I'll give you one translation of it. I'm not sure it's the same one that John used, but all experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind, speak or act with a corrupted mind, and suffering follows as the wagon wheel follows the hoof of the ox. Did he go through these 2? I'm sure he must have. Is it like the beginning point? Yes? Jana's nodding her head, so good. Okay, so this first verse is saying that if we have a corrupt thought, if we have a corrupt mind, if we have a mind of attachment, a mind of anger, a mind of whatever, all these various afflictions, then we are going to create the causes for suffering just in the same way that the wagon wheel follows the hoof of the ox. There won't be any escaping that. If this is what leads, the mind's like the ox leading us on the path of this suffering. Lama's Open, the Door to Satisfaction, explains the story behind this verse. I'm not going to go into all of it. If you're curious, you can find that in the chapter. It's the chapter on motivation, I think. But essentially, the second verse speaks to the opposite, the other state of mind. He says, all experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. That's the exact same way the first verse started. Speak or act with a peaceful mind, and happiness follows like a never departing shadow. So just like your shadow is always following you, it's always there behind you. Well, if you create through good thoughts, virtuous thoughts, actions that follow from that, well, then you're going to experience a result of happiness, just as the shadow is always together with that. Again, there's a story behind that as well that you can look up with Rinpoche's explanation. Now, he goes on to explain how this means that the state of our mind completely dictates what the action produces in terms of its result. It's not the action itself that does that. And to make his point, he uses that example that I'm sure we all are familiar with, the Bodhisattva ship captain, right? When the Buddha was a Bodhisattva in a previous life, and he was in charge of a ship of merchants. And one of the merchants, he saw through his clairvoyance that one of the merchants was going to take the life of all the others. And he decided to intervene in a very, it seems like a bit of a drastic way, but it goes against the common path, the Hinayana, the foundational individual liberation vows of never taking the life of another being. It goes against that, but his motivation was pure. His motivation was compassion for all of the men or merchants who would have been killed by that man, but also for that man himself, because he would experience unbelievable suffering from killing so many beings. And the Bodhisattva ship captain, through his willingness to take that upon himself, he actually created, according to Rinpoche says there is debate on this, but according to Rinpoche, he actually created a virtuous action by killing. Killing in itself is a natural misdeed that is negative, but through the power of the mind, as is explained by these verses from the Dhammapada, he was able to create not just something that was virtuous, but actually something that hastened his enlightenment. The Buddha became enlightened even more quickly because of this act of killing another being through the incredible compassion that he had. Now, again, this isn't carte blanche for us to, go around killing beings out of compassion, thinking, oh, I've got this great compassion for you, and I'm going to take your life so you stop doing what you're doing. We have to have a little more wisdom and insight to be able to do that. But it's explaining that example from the point of view of the importance of motivation. If we have a very clear, very positive motivation, then just as the shadow continues to follow, regardless, happiness will follow that action because the mind has led it in that direction. Our minds are incredibly powerful. And this is something Venerable Rabbeinu always emphasizes, right? The power of our minds. So motivation is very important. As Rinpoche says, in Paramitayana, the mind of bodhicitta can make non-virtuous actions virtuous. What would normally be non-virtuous becomes virtuous. Of course, one of the things that Rinpoche emphasizes frequently when he teaches, and this is also in the wonderful book that you probably have, Bodhisattva Attitude, Teachings from Lama Zopa. This was from the first Light of the Path retreat back in 2009. He emphasized what he calls bodhicitta mindfulness. We even have them in the prayer book, right? These different activities that are mundane activities that we can engage in, but we bring bodhicitta awareness to them. And then they become virtuous, not much more virtuous. He uses the example in the book, in the prayer book and in Bodhisattva Attitude, mostly of what we might consider neutral actions, right? Like turning on a light in a room. If we think through, my turning on this light, may this illuminate the minds of all beings, removing all the darkness in their minds. Or if we go to the bathroom and as we're urinating or excreting, we think, oh, I'm removing all the negativities of sentient beings, all their afflictions and delusions. Well, then we are taking what is normally an action that is probably, again, pretty neutral. We're not engaging in it with any great attachment, nor necessarily with any great aversion, but we're just doing these things throughout our day. Neutral actions can be transformed into virtue. Negative actions can be transformed into virtue, what would normally be negative. So we have to really take this to heart. And bodhicitta is one of the key ways that we are able to continue to be in our world and do the things that we do and have the pleasures and et cetera in our existence, but transform them through thinking of others. And even just eating our meals, right? We're encouraged by Rinpoche all the time to eat our meals with a mind of cherishing others, thinking of others, thinking about why we are even partaking of that food so we can, strengthen this body, continue to tend to this body so we can use it well to benefit others through this life. And we can also think about others having that food, offering it to them. We can do many actions with the same sort of mindset. So again, it does sound like we're starting off at this very beginning point, letting go of the 8 worldly dharmas that are the beginning of our dharma practice. And now we're trying to apply bodhicitta, which is kind of way further down the road. But we all have some exposure to this. Every one of us has had Lam Rim teachings, probably more Lam Rim teachings than we need, because we've had them and we just aren't practicing them, but we need to keep hearing them again. But we all know what bodhicitta is. We all know the power of this mind. We just have to bring it to bear in all of our daily actions. And then all of those things that we are doing, all of the material things that we have, all of the comforts that we enjoy and what have you, we have those experiences, but they don't become the mind of attachment and desire. Why? Because we're thinking of others. We're cherishing others. We're thinking of bodhicitta. So these things tie together. It's not like, again, we just simply address the 8 worldly concerns and then we can have all these other things. All the realizations of the path to enlightenment can be incorporated. In fact, Rinpoche emphasizes how the 3 principal aspects can all be incorporated. Not just bodhicitta, but renunciation. Renunciation means seeing samsara for what it is and developing the wish to be free of that. So that can also be a mindset that you bring to your experience of these 8 worldly dharmas. See them for what they are. Rinpoche emphasizes that it's very easy to see that the 4 that are on the column of unpleasant experiences, having loss, having people criticize us, having discomfort and so on. Those are real easy to see as unfavorable, right? But we don't get that there's suffering on this side too. We have to see them for what they are. So when you're having those pleasant experiences, try to bring the mind of renunciation to bear. See them for what they are. See that they are not satisfactory. That, as we just saw earlier, they don't lead to that. That's one of their major faults. All of those things that we keep chasing after, that we've done lifetime after lifetime, they haven't brought us any greater happiness In fact, they've done the opposite. So if we see that our mind of craving and attachment just keeps following in that way, then we say, okay, well, then I need to see them in a different light. I need to see the suffering nature of these things. I need to see that those pleasant experiences, yes, we call them pleasant experiences, but they don't last. They're transitory. They're the suffering of change. So again, this is all part of how we work with it. In terms of emptiness, we'll talk about that maybe again, if I have time, a little bit later. But we can even bring the teachings on emptiness to bear when we're experiencing these worldly objects, understanding that they have no inherent nature of that. I always want to go jumping right into emptiness when I start talking about, let me talk about a few things before we get to that though. The Rinpoche emphasizes that this is really Dharma work then, to really work with changing our minds, subduing our minds. We have that verse that we would always start the class with. We've shortened it now to just doing the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. But there's that wonderful verse there about do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. Subdue your mind thoroughly is the main one that's being emphasized here. The first two are important. That's our beginning practice, right? I got to stop doing all those harmful things. As Venerable Rabina says, zip your lip and keep your hands to yourself. Stop harming others and doing those actions that are harming you as well. And then I perform perfect virtuous actions. Do everything that you can to engage in virtue, helping others and so on. But the big advice of the Buddha, the big teaching of the Buddha is subdue your mind thoroughly. So when we are following after the 8 worldly concerns, are we subduing our mind? No, we're actually following the same patterns that, just keep creeping up again, like more attachment, more attachment, more attachment. We're not subduing our minds at all. We subdue our minds by having virtuous states of mind in place of those that are non-virtuous, dismantling our attachment and so on. So as long as we have this conviction in the 8 worldly dharmas as the source of our happiness and well-being, as long as I avoid everything on the no list and I get everything that's on the yes list, then I've got a good life. Well, then we're not going to actually subdue our minds. We're not going to do the hard work. We're not going to do what the Buddhist path is really compelling us to do, to change our minds, to actually replace the negative ones with more positive, mindsets that lead to actual happiness. So Rinpoche goes on to say, one definition of Dharma is any remedy for the delusions. Any remedy for the delusions. Anything that we can put in place of that lessens, diminishes, eliminates the delusions, this is Dharma. And we talked earlier about when we talk about the 8 worldly dharmas, we're actually talking about something that's the opposite. It's something that we are grasping at as real and then getting involved with through the mind of attachment and so on. Real Dharma is anything that is a remedy for those delusions, a remedy for our attachment, a remedy for our anger. That's the real Dharma. That's the real practice of Dharma. And the 8 worldly dharmas are the perfect place to practice it, because this is what we are caught up in. Every one of us to some degree. Again, I can point to myself and say, I'm not free of these yet. I see how I've got these tendrils and they just kind of, keep getting caught in them and what have you. In fact, it's interesting, there's one teaching that I had from another tradition. Pema Chodron talks about Dzigar Kongtrul Rinpoche and his teachings on this word Shenpa. I've taught on it here and there, and it's really quite interesting. It's in the book. I brought it with me tonight, this little book, Taking the Leap. She talks about it. And Shenpa is sometimes translated as attachment, but she likes to talk about it as this idea of getting stuck. It's this sort of force. It's not really kind of a conceptual mind as much as it's what draws us into our preoccupation with these objects. Something appears and it's like, we're like a moth to a flame. I mean, we just get totally caught up in it. This is Shenpa, this sort of stuckness, getting stuck by all of these things. She even says that things are somehow kind of seeming like they're adhesive, like they're just waiting there and they just get us kind of caught up in them. This is, I've never heard this teaching in our tradition. Of course, Pema Chodron says she never heard it before she started taking teachings from Dzigar Kongtrul Rinpoche. But it's a kind of a way of analyzing what is going on at that moment. This is a very deeply ingrained habit that we have, that all of these things in the world around us, this is a bit like that Venerable Rabina's junkies born into a world of junk thing, right? Everything around us seems to have this power that is actually there waiting to kind of pull us in. we're like innocent victims, like that moth that just goes towards it thinking it's, going to happiness and gets burned in the process, right? Well, this is what's happening with us with all of these objects of attachment. They seem to have some sort of energy, some sort of adhesive quality. I want to read a little bit from what she says in here, because I think it's a really wonderful teaching that, again, I hope you've pursued it before. And if you haven't, it might be good to take a look at what she says in this book. If we are willing to acknowledge our Shenpa and to experience it without sidetracks, then our natural intelligence begins to guide us. We begin to foresee the whole chain reaction and where it will lead. There's some wisdom that becomes accessible to us, wisdom based on compassion for oneself and others that has nothing to do with ego's fears. It's the part of us that knows we can connect and live from our basic goodness, our basic intelligence, openness, and warmth. Over time, this knowledge becomes a stronger force than the Shenpa, and we naturally interrupt the chain reaction before it even starts. We naturally become able to prevent an epidemic of aggression before it even begins. And so, again, this is this idea that we have to see this for what it is and disempower that. Stop following that mind of attachment that is getting caught up in all of these things. It is thinking that they're desirable. They're everything that we want, everything that we're looking for. So I did want to talk a little bit about this, because this came up last week. Mary Jo had the question having to do with our attachment to our own path, our attachment to the Dharma, our attachment to Buddhism. She says in here, in my own training, I have always been instructed not to get caught up in accepting and rejecting, not to get caught by biased mind. Chogyam Trungpa was particularly emphatic about this. At one time, this presented a question for me. Did it mean I should not have preferences, such as liking one kind of flower or one kind of food far better than another? Was it problematic not to like the taste of raw onions or the smell of patchouli oil, or to feel more at home with Buddhism than with any philosophy or religion? When I heard the teaching on Shenpa, my dilemma was resolved. The issue isn't with preferences, but with the Shenpa behind them. If I get worked up when presented with raw onions, if the very sight of them triggers aversion in me, then the bias is deep. I'm clearly hooked. If I start an anti-raw onion campaign, or write an anti-patchouli oil book, or begin to attack another philosophy or religion, then it's Shenpa big time. My mind and heart are closed. I'm so invested in my views and opinions that those who think differently are my adversaries. I become fundamentalists. She goes on, but you're getting the gist of it. The problem is this attachment and the Shenpa, the charge behind that. Yeah, you can have preferences. You can say, oh, I like, blue objects. I'm going to fill my room with lots of blue things, that make me very happy and please me and whatever. But are you attached to those? Is there a Shenpa around those? What happens when somebody comes in and destroys all your blue objects? What happens when we lose all of those things? We see again that the degree to which we are charged in that way is going to have an effect on us, because of the strength of that, because of the Shenpa that we have, because of the attachment that we are following. So again, this whole idea of what we're trying to do is subdue our minds, trying to get rid of these afflictions. And if we continually follow the 8 worldly dharmas, we're doing the exact opposite. We're only strengthening them. Of course, one of the biggest antidotes to the 8 worldly dharmas is the meditation on death and impermanence. I think we all know this. I mentioned it last time, because when we recognize, especially with the material things that we have, that we're going to have to separate from every one of those things. You cannot take one atom with you. Nothing goes with you when you leave this life. The degree to which you are attached to them is going to be the degree to which you have pain on your deathbed having to part from all of them. So we can understand death and impermanence with regard to the other worldly dharmas as well. What does it matter if we had a good reputation, or if everybody praises to the hills, or if everybody, if we had all the comfortable things and a very cushy life and everything went our way, our inner Goldilocks, as I said last time, was completely fulfilled all the time. We always got it right. Everything was enjoyable. Who cares? Especially because it's not only, again, that we didn't do something virtuous with this life, we actually did the opposite. We only created more non-virtue. So knowing that death is going to come, we need to stop our attachment and preoccupation with these things. This is not going to end pretty if we continue to be attached in this way. So Rinpoche says, the main remedy to the thought of the worldly dharmas is meditation on impermanence and death. If one does not remember death, one does not remember Dharma. And even if one remembers Dharma, if one does not remember impermanence and death, then one does not practice Dharma. Again, that's why the death awareness meditation, I'm not going to go into it tonight. You all are very familiar with it through the Lam Rim. Very important to focus on those three main points, that it is absolutely certain we are going to die, that it is uncertain when it's going to happen, and that the only thing that is important aren't these worldly concerns and all the things that we've been preoccupied with. It's what we've done with our minds. Again, subduing our minds, creating the opposing forces that will overcome our attachment and delusions in the future. That's what we take with us, the good karma that comes from all of that deep work. I mentioned last time as well that these teachings on the 8 worldly dharmas are often set out at the beginning of the section of the Lam Rim dealing with impermanence and death. Why? Because they show exactly how we are doing the opposite. We're totally caught up and preoccupied with this life and all the wonderful things of this life, not seeing that this is all transitory and impermanent. It's all going to go away like that. I mean, literally like that. For many people, it is exactly that. They're living their life, and then one moment something comes, and they're gone. There were there was a couple of deaths recently where somebody died like really, really quickly in the news recently. It wasn't like, a long process with illness and what have you, where you at least have some time to kind of think about it, think about what's going on, maybe try to correct your mind then to the best of your ability. It can happen like that. Are you ready for that? That's what we need to think about. I'm shaking my head too, Alex. I'm not ready for that. We still have a lot of work to do, right? So again, death and impermanence is really an important way to also come back to these 8 worldly dharmas, to reflect continually. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I did find this where he says this, because some people maybe doubt when I say this. He says, the best thing to do is to recite every morning, I am going to die today. This cuts off all problems. I mean, seriously, if we think today is it, this is the day I'm going to die, well, then you're going to go out for like lobster and steak for, or you're going to have your great last meal before you exit, or are you going to do something more meaningful and purposeful with this life? Are you actually going to do something that makes a difference in terms of what you take with you from this life? That's what we will do if we think today is the day I'm going to die. If we really don't think that, if we really kind of say, oh yeah, today I'm going to die today, but then we go about our day just doing all these other things, well, then we're really not taking it to heart. We have to take this to heart, because one day we're going to be correct. May not be today, because it wasn't today so far, but one day you're going to be correct. One day you're going to think, I'm going to die today, and you're going to die that day. And so if you practice every day with that mentality, the 8 worldly dharmas become insignificant. They come into our lives, but we don't care any longer. Why? Because we know there's something more important that we have to attend to. Now he says, you are going to die today, so what are you going to do with your life? And then he says, suddenly you have the answer. The heart practice is what is included in this verse of Lama Chopa that he quotes. Cherishing myself is the source of all sufferings, while cherishing others is the basis of all qualities. Please grant me blessings to do the heart practice, the yoga of exchanging myself for others. It goes back to bodhicitta, goes back to cherishing others. Why? Because this is the most meaningful thing we can do with our lives. This is the most important thing for us to do with our lives. All the other Dharma teachings are important too, but what do they lead up to? They lead up to bodhicitta and fulfilling our deepest potential through that mind. If we really think that my purpose of life every day is not to get preoccupied with my own well-being, my own concerns, my own self-cherishing garbage, but to actually be attending to the welfare of others. Well, that also diminishes the power of the 8 worldly dharmas, right? Because they're all about self-cherishing. They're all about me chasing after what brings me pleasure and avoiding what brings me pain. So we see that within the Lam Rim, there's a richness of teachings that we can apply to help undermine the Dharma, and those are all part of, undermine the 8 worldly dharmas, and those are all part of our practice of the Dharma. Replacing negative states of mind, attachment, and so on, self-cherishing, self-grasping, replacing it with the minds of wisdom, the mind of cherishing others, the mind that is the essence of bodhicitta. So, Rinpoche says we should constantly keep the thought of other sentient beings in place of the I. Learn to cherish them rather than cherishing me, what I want, what I need in this life. So we're getting close to the end of here. I do want to maybe just touch briefly. He has a whole chapter in the Door to Satisfaction that's quite interesting, finding no self to cherish. This is kind of getting to where we have to recognize that there's a power to the teachings on emptiness that we may not have immediately, but they're really effective if we start to see that what is driving me going after the 8 worldly dharmas, trying to get the 4 that I want, trying to avoid the 4 I don't want, is this strong sense of an I. It's a strong sense of believing in an I that exists independently, that isn't merely imputed. And as Rinpoche says, if we get to really understanding this idea of the mind, the I is merely imputed, it's almost as if the I doesn't exist. We have to go that far to where it feels like it's all slipping away from us. There's nothing really here. But then we remind ourselves, but there is the merely labeled I, the merely imputed I, the merely labeled everything, because everything exists in that way in the end. When we have that awareness, we can understand that there's no ground for attachment. There's no ground for any of these preoccupations with worldly concerns and what have you. Why? Because it's all a big show that our ignorance is put on for us, that we have bought into and that we believe in. Well, it's not real. It doesn't exist in the way that you think it does. So again, I'm going to kind of save some of that for maybe another time when I can teach more on emptiness. The last bit of advice that I think is well worth sharing before we conclude tonight, and I'll see if there's some questions after I finish, but I like what he says here at the very end. He has a whole chapter that says, having no choice then but to practice Dharma. And we really have no choice. If we really want happiness, if we really are convinced that this is a valid path, which, as I said earlier, all of us are to some degree, we wouldn't be here if we didn't have that conviction. And as I said, I congratulate you on having that aspiration, seeing these teachings as the way out, seeing these teachings as the way out for all beings. Well, then you have to be dedicated to the path that leads to that. You have to actually practice Dharma. So he says, His Holiness the Dalai Lama often advises that the best way to live one's life is in an isolated, solitary place, renouncing this life and the 8 worldly dharmas, and one-pointedly concentrating the mind on the graduated path to enlightenment. But not everybody can do this, he says, right? I mean, most of us do have family commitments and other things that we find it really hard to think about that. But it's an interesting exercise to go through of looking at and saying, well, what is really keeping me from going whole hog, just committing 100%, to just saying, okay, I'm just going to shut it all off. I'm just going to go out and really do the work that needs to be done. Anyway, the second one, he says, for those who cannot live such a life, but who have a Dharma education, the second best choice is to teach Dharma to others. And we all can do this to some degree. I mean, whether you consider yourself a professional teacher or something, registered teacher we have in the FPMT, that's maybe not as important. But nonetheless, we cannot maybe practice this complete removal from the world and what have you, but we can still do something very beneficial. Share the Dharma with others, teach others. And he says, for those who don't have the Dharma education needed to teach others, or perhaps the inclination to do that, he says the third option is to practice as much as possible and to serve others in society. To just recognize that this is still a very useful way to engage in this human life, to actually be about dedicating your life to others, serving them as much as you can, whether they're the people in your immediate family, friends, what have you, the people in your town, city, wherever you live, the people in the world at large, continually to be thinking of others and serving others, to practice as much as possible in addition to that. But we really have no choice but to practice Dharma. This is the bottom line, regardless of whatever route we take in using this life. Practicing Dharma, he says, means renouncing the cause of problems which are in your mind and creating the cause of happiness, which are also in your mind. So it's all about shifting our minds, moving away from our attachment to these worldly concerns and towards the Dharma. Then he goes on at the very tail end. I'm just going to share a little bit of this because I think it's really important. We have to have this determination. I've been using the word commitment, but it's a determination, right? It all comes down to how determined are we to actually do this. I'm saying this to myself. Trust me, I'm not somebody who's, completely 100%, determined yet. And we're moving in that direction, right? All of us are. Rinpoche says, if the determination to practice is made, then there are no difficulties. If the determination is not made, then there are. And what makes you unable to make that determination is the thought of the 8 worldly dharmas. What keeps you from being fully committed to some degree? I mentioned this last week, right? Being involved versus being committed. What keeps you from being fully committed is the 8 worldly dharmas. That's what's holding us back. That's what's actually keeping us from being fully signed up, doing all the work that needs to be done. Because all of those other things are dharma, as long as we've let go of the worldly dharmas, as long as we've addressed that, corrected that. As I pointed out, if we have kind of our feet in both places, or one foot is firmly grounded in the worldly dharmas and the other foot is trying to aspire to all of this, they're contradictory. There's just no way we're going to make that much progress. We're going to be kind of spinning our wheels. The more effort we put into trying to get free of the afflictions and, practice renunciation and all these things, and the more we still stay attached to all the pleasures of samsara, you're just doing the opposite. You're doing everything that's in contradiction to what you are aspiring to do. Okay, so let's see what questions or comments people have on that, because I don't know, I get passionate about this topic recently because it seems like what I need to work on myself. So, but I'm sure many of you see nodding heads and what have you, that you can see this in your own lives and how much the 8 worldly dharmas are affecting you and keeping you back to some degree. Any comments or questions here on my wonderful Zoom room of people? Hi, Len, you have a question? No, okay. Anyone? Hi, Pamene. It's good to see you. So if the question in your mind is, well, where do I go from here? Well, I think it is, as I said at the end of last week, I think it's really worth just being meticulous and looking at how these 8 worldly dharmas are affecting you. Throughout your day, maybe at the end of each day, reflect on how much you got caught up in each of them. What are the things that you can bring to mind that will help to combat it the next time that you encounter them? And again, recognizing that the actual experiences themselves aren't the problem. The problem is our mind of attachment, the mind that grasps at all of this, that goes after it and doesn't want to be separated from it. Again, that charge of Shenpa that I mentioned earlier. This is what the real problem is. Of course, sometimes all of these things can also become a problem. Lama Yeshe, and I was looking at some of the things that he was talking about in his book, Ego, Attachment, and Liberation, which I also mentioned last week. And he says, having a simpler life and not having so many things can be really helpful, because the more things we have, the more likely we are to be distracted, right? Because, all of those things are kind of tugging at us, pulling at us, giving us kind of an excuse to keep turning towards them. That's why simplifying our life does make some sense. Not have so many things, not sign up for so many different, services that you can watch, not just Netflix, but you can watch Hulu and you can watch this and watch that. And, you have 18 different things to choose from every night. Well, then you're going to be doing it every night, right? You're going to always have that pulling at you like, oh, I'm paying for this. I should be watching it. Or something goes on with you, some level of attachment that's happening. So simplifying our lives does make some sense, but the problem isn't the objects. The problem is our own mind in relation to those objects. But as long as we keep feeding that attachment, it's completely against the grain of what we're trying to do in practicing the Dharma. Okay. I think we can go ahead and do some dedication prayers then, if other folks, it's right about 7:30. So let's put the prayers on the screen. John's doing that right now. Those of you in the Gompa here, we're going to go to, I have to remember all these pages. I haven't done this in so long. Maybe Sarah knows.
235.
335?
235.
Okay, 235. Thank you, Jana. 235 in the Gompa here. We're going to do the first 2 prayers that we generally do to dedicate all the merits to our own attainment of enlightenment and therefore the enlightenment of all beings. And as we do this, think about really dedicating to the removal of these 8 worldly concerns, your attachment to all of this. This is the beginning step to move towards attaining enlightenment. So dedicate very strongly that these may be lessened in your own mind. We may be free of this attachment and this delusion, so we can begin sincerely our practice of the Dharma. And then the second verse, where we recall bodhicitta, as we spoke about earlier, this incredibly powerful mind that can even transform non-virtue into virtue. May that grow deeply in our own hearts and in the hearts of all beings. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Then we go forward to the long life prayers, 244, and then the prayer books here. You probably have this prayer for long life His Holiness on the following page. It's been paper clipped there. We'll do that one, and then we'll do the one for Lama Zopa Rinpoche that's on 244. As we recite these two prayers for these precious teachers, think that we're creating the causes for all spiritual guides, whatever their tradition, to have a good health and long lives, and to continue to be of benefit to all sentient beings. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers, honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Let's go ahead and do the prayer for Asahita as well. And in the prayer books here, it's a little further back, I think. I'm trying to remember where that is. It's page 282 at the top. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us, in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. And we dedicate for those beings that we're holding in our hearts. Every one of us knows beings who are experiencing some form of suffering, whether it be obstacles to their well-being, illness, those who have died or who are dying at this time. We think about them and send this positive energy out to them, gladly giving it to them with this mind that genuinely cherishes those beings, wants them to be free of suffering and to attain happiness. And think through this, may that actually come to pass for these beings. May they be free of whatever afflicts them currently, and may they find all of what will lead them on the path to attaining true peace and happiness. And may this result also come to pass for all sentient beings through what we've done here tonight. Thank you all so much. Everyone have a very safe and peaceful holiday season. As most of you know, I'm taking a little hiatus from teaching for a while to kind of tend to my own practice to some degree, as well as hopefully not get too involved in my worldly dharmas, but to actually, do some sort of recharging, refreshing, so I can come back at teaching again after all of this concludes in May. So I'll hopefully see you all again somewhere in there. I think that was all that I did want to mention that if you need something to do on Lama Tsongkhapa Day, which is next Sunday, a very auspicious day in our tradition, I will be leading the, and if you're inclined to do this, you don't have to do it because I'm saying it, but I'll be leading the Guru Puja at Thupten Norbu Ling online. It'll be at 1:30 to 3 Mountain Time on Sunday. If you'd like to participate in that, it'll be Lama Chopa and so that I'll be leading, maybe with some extended one offerings, but anyway. Thank you all for being here. All right, everyone, be well.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Dhamma.
You're very welcome.